Welcome into the Graham and Mac Lane podcast presented by Ingles, the official supermarket of Graham and Mac Lane. We are reviewing different teams around the league, and today it's time to talk Florida State. Of course, we're going to have Ira on, Mac. There's no one else that we'd have on from Warchant. Ira, welcome to the show. How's the off season been so far?
It's going a lot better than the season of 2025 went for Florida State, and the initial weeks of the transfer portal we're looking a little gloomy, but they rallied, they put together I think a pretty good roster, and yeah, I mean this time of year, even at Florida State, even after winning 7 games the last 2 seasons, I'm not gonna say hope springs eternal, but you can find some reasons for hope here in
That
Tallahassee.
that was a
Great answer.
stab right here. 7 wins in 2 years. That's just
Oh. So
God,
your off season is going more like the Bama game than, let's say, the Stanford game.
Man.
Okay,
Yeah, it's,
good to know.
yeah, maybe not the Alabama game, but maybe the couple weeks after where they beat up on Kent State and East Texas A&M, you're just kind of living in the afterglow. You really haven't accomplished much,
there we
but at
go.
least there's still some positive vibes.
Well, I think that's a great place to start because
Yeah.
there is so much. And listen, I think at the end of the day, Florida State's Florida State. Big brand, means a ton to us, means a ton to this league. I love the people there, love the fans, love you guys. And it literally kills me to see them where they are. And it was a fascinating offseason because you add some really key pieces. You bring in Deuce, you bring in Tommy, who we love and covered for early years in his career, and some other guys that we just thought, okay, this looks more like the roster that we think. And then there's the chatter in the offseason, and Tommy saying Nick Saban ain't saving nobody. And then they go and do it in a dominating, physical, just butt whipping fashion. And I'm looking around like, the Noles are all the way back. Like this is huge. And then, of course, the 2 weeks after, as you mentioned, 77 points, 66 points, and the offense is rolling. It looks like the perfect form of what Gus wants to do. And then I will never forget this. This is one of the silliest, like dumbest things that's ever happened in my career. We are at Florida State, or excuse me, Wake Forest for Wake Forest versus Georgia Tech. And we bring up this game, Florida State versus Virginia. And I am talking crazy, Ira. I am saying Tommy Castellanos is not going to play in the fourth quarter. Like it's going to be crazy. And they lose. And it was, it was a back and forth game. And we're thinking, okay, what's going to happen? And then it just started avalanching. So my question to you, what happened? How did this happen?
Yeah, man, I've got theories. I don't know if they're correct, but I've got some theories. No, I mean, you were just like everybody at that point. I mean, and there's no better way to capsulize just what Florida State's brand means than the fact that they beat Alabama, not a great Alabama team, an Alabama team that had questions coming into the season, but they beat
A playoff
Alabama.
Alabama team, by the way. Go ahead, though.
But
Sorry.
but but they go in, they win that game, and like within a week or two, they're number 8 in the country after going 2-10 the year before. So it's just really crazy. But yeah, I mean, I think they didn't handle that very well. Just I think it's easy to look back and say. And I remember, and I first guessed this. I was on the field for pregame at Virginia, and I was just watching the interaction between some of the Virginia players and some of the Florida State players. And you guys can relate to this because you guys played at a high level. But you can sometimes feel when one team's chattering and talking trash and the other team's just kind of looking at them like, yeah, okay, we're about to find out. Like the Virginia guys, I thought were very mature and confident. And some of the young Florida State guys were talking just crazy.
Uh,
And it felt like they were trying to like talk themselves into what they were. And the Virginia guys were just like, yeah, man, we're about to strap them on and see. And the way that game played out, I thought, Virginia just jumped on them. They had a veteran leader at quarterback, in Chandler Morris. That game was set up perfectly for them. I'm not even going to call it a trap game because Virginia was good. But they just played at a high level, and Florida State just could never get over the hump. They started to kind of fight back, but they just couldn't get over the hump and made some mistakes and lose that game. But I said that night that was not an embarrassing loss. I thought Virginia, you could tell Virginia was going to be a good football team with that quarterback, the way they were playing. That was going to be a good football team. They end up, I don't know, they win 10 games. I mean, they end up having a good season. And so I never felt like that game was an embarrassment, but I do think it kind of shocked the players a little bit. Like, I think they believed they were all the way back too, like when they beat Alabama. And then so you lose that game, and then you come right back, and Miami just pounces on you. And you look like you don't belong on the field with them. They kinda come back late, they get back in the game, then the next week they lose at home to Pitt, and that to me was that's where just everything fell apart, and I think that's why they lost to Stanford. I just think the confidence, all the confidence and bravado that they built up after that Alabama win just kind of over the next couple weeks just got shattered, and I think they were a shell of themselves when they went to Stanford. Now they did kind of rebound. I'll give them a little bit of credit. You know, they did come back. They beat Wake at home, Virginia Tech at home. Like, those aren't bad football teams. Wake certainly not. So I think they figured out a way to find their sea legs a little bit, but at that point it was too late, and I just think that they spiraled in confidence after that. The way Miami jumped on them and then losing at home to Pitt the week later.
That's a great way to explain it. We always talk about, these things snowballed, and I feel like we exaggerate with that sometimes, but this was not exaggeration. This was a literal snowball effect. I mean, it just kept getting bigger and bigger and rolling down the mountain, and then it was gonna be an avalanche. When you talk about Alabama, just going back to that game, because I still think that is one of the craziest results I've ever seen in college football, ever. One of the biggest upsets between two P4 teams. Now, you can talk, App State, Michigan, whatever, but no one gave Florida State a chance in that game. And I remember, Mac, when we talked to Tommy, I want to say pre-Virginia or post-Virginia, and he sounded surprised that they won that game. I feel like the whole team surprised themselves. Like, it this is a weird way to say it, Ira, but could that Bama game have kind of been the worst thing to happen to this group in some ways?
It's funny, man. It's funny you say that because I think it definitely, from a perception standpoint, it hurt them. And because they fought that the rest of the year. It's like anytime they played poorly, it's like, how did you do that against Alabama? And I think the reality is, looking back at it again, it's hindsight, but looking back at it, Alabama did not take them seriously. I mean, I just think Alabama saw 2-10. Coaches can say whatever they want, but when they were putting on the film, the only film they could show them was that team in 2024. And it's like, these guys can't play football. And so they just were not ready for it. And then Florida State, man, they played their butts off. Tommy was awesome. Gus had a great game plan. Gus, he probably spent every minute of every day for 8 months preparing for that game, and just did a great job. And they get the win. But to your point, I do think it gave some of the players like an overinflated sense of who they were. I think it affected coaches too. The coaches will never admit it, and it's a sin as a coach to get overconfident. It may be the greatest sin as a coach, but I think the coaches started to believe that these guys were better than they were, and I think you saw that in the way they played. I just thought, especially the Virginia game, and I don't think they respected Virginia going into that game. And then once it kind of started going sideways, they had a hard time coming back. But yeah, I definitely think it. I'm not gonna say it was the worst thing because it did so much for them early in the season, but they clearly weren't ready to handle it.
Did you know Ingles only sells USDA choice and prime cuts of meat? Maybe it's time to reward yourself. Our butchers cut all our meat fresh in the store every day. Grass-fed, organic, you name it. Not only that, we'll even cut it to order just the way you like it. And we grind meat fresh in the store multiple times a day. It's all in the bag. That's the best meat in town for the best folks in town. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Yeah, and I think even the 2 games following that, like, I don't want to discredit those outcomes either. I mean, it was rolling. I mean, this offense looked unbelievable. The defense did what it is, and I think against Alabama more impressive, but everything was perfect. And so my question now is kind of pivot to, Mike Norvell a little bit here, and just some future thoughts. But, the Virginia game, Friday night, spooky in Charlottesville, all these things. Turnovers were weird. Like, you're giving them the ball back. You're not, handling business. You're not doing your thing. So I was like, that's a little fluky, and Virginia looks for real. Then you play number 2 Miami, the next week. And maybe you were looking ahead to that game too, and how good I think Miami is. I thought at that point, they were going to win a national championship, and they, almost did. So I kind of threw that to the side. It was the Pitt Stanford where I was kind of like, code red is happening right now. Like, this is not good. Like, you have people, as you kind of alluded to, thinking way too highly of themselves, not respecting opponents. Because Pittsburgh, I mean, they started, I believe, Heinschel for the first time or a couple of times
The week
leading
before,
into
I
that.
think. Yeah.
He ran all over him. I mean, it wasn't on the scouting report, but also you got to respect the players. And then, of course, losing at Stanford that way was horrific. So to get back to my question about Norvell, he's going into whatever year he's been there, been a head coach. He's seen a lot of different things. Do you credit this to, well, this is a new thing that he's never seen? And I think, and I think Kelly thinks, and Ira, not sure you think, coaches have to go through things to learn about them, and coaches have to still get better and things of that nature. Maybe he had never started with this before, where he didn't see the complacency, or he didn't see the big ego and headness after beating the Alabama. Do you kind of chalk that up to, this is just another lesson that, you know, you got to endure, and now going in the future, you're never going to let that happen again type thing?
Yeah, I don't know. I think he was going through a lot. I think Mike Norvell was going through a lot these last couple of years. You know, you think about where he was in 2023. You know, it's just amazing. Again, if somebody had like got into an accident and went to a coma 2 years ago and then came out now, they would never believe that the way Florida State fans talk about Mike Norvell right now. I mean, it's completely 180 degrees from where it was. The fans are so mad about his contract extension, but they would have gone crazy if Florida
Right.
State had let him leave, 2 years ago. So I think it's kind of unprecedented what he's been through to go from 13-0 to 2-10. And then you make the changes they made. I think they overreacted personally, again, in hindsight, you know, taking play calling away from Mike Norvell, bringing in Gus Malzahn. I don't think Mike Norvell knew how to be a head coach for that team in 2025. I
Mm.
think they tried to make him a CEO coach, and that's what he was trying to embrace that. I think he found some positives in that. For example, in practices, he was able to not just focus on the QBs in the offense. He could go spend time with a linebacker who's going through something, or go talk to a corner that he's been wondering how he is, mentally. Like he could take advantage of some of those moments, but I don't think he knew what to do in games. I mean, I actually wrote about this in the Stanford game. Like I watched him a lot on that sideline of the Stanford game, and I don't think he knew what to do. Like he couldn't really take ownership of Tommy and the offense because that's Gus. He's got Tony White coaching the defense. He's not really a defensive guy anyway. I think some guys can be a CEO coach. I think Dabo, has certainly shown he's very good in that role. But I think other coaches that came up as play callers like Jimbo Fisher, Mike Norvell, some of those guys, that's what they are. Like that's their special sauce. And so I think he was a little lost during all of that. And then compounding it by the fact that, he also personally went from top of the world to the bottom of the heap. And then now all of a sudden you beat Alabama and like people are happy again. So I just think I don't know that I'm sure he grew from it. But I think as it goes forward, him going back, and I know we'll talk about this, but him going back to being a play caller, kind of leaving that CEO coach role, I think it'll be good for him. And I think he was just I don't think he knew how to handle not just this team going through what they were going through, but himself, in that new role.
Right. Well, KG, I think what is also interesting to me, and I think we're going to start seeing this a lot more, just for whatever reason, how the sport is right now. When you hire a guy who was a great coordinator, a great play caller as a head coach, you have to let him still have that superpower. Like, look at what Oklahoma just did last year. They allowed Venables to retake over that defense, which is he's the best, like maybe the best ever at doing. Why would you want to take that away? Why would you eliminate that part of what he is? I get that there's so much more with the job, and there's so much more when you're the head coach, but you got to let Norvell be who he is. That's the reason you hired him. That's the reason you brought him in. And so, KG, for me, this is kind of a PSA to all athletic directors, boards, boosters, all these things. If you bring in that guy that's that good at something, allow him to be that. That's just my soapbox for this episode. Sorry.
That's interesting. And the fact that you felt like, Ira, he didn't really know what to do. I mean, that trickles down to the players and can lead to, them either panicking or being like, what is his role? All these types of things. I want to ask about Stanford, and I know we're going to look ahead. And, Stanford was a debacle in so many different ways. Some of the hindsight with Stanford, like that game was late, right? It was a
Uh,
late kick.
it was really late. Yeah, it was
Yes, it
like,
was at 10 o'clock, right?
yeah, Eastern time. So, yeah, but they made the trip, they flew out there, and they didn't spend extra time, like, they talked about maybe taking an
Sure.
extra day, they didn't do that, and then, yeah, the game would have been, 10 o'clock Eastern time.
And so you're playing into 2 a.m., which your body there's just so many different factors, but I remember seeing things and reading things about maybe the locker room was a mess after that game and maybe players weren't respecting Norvell and all this
I
stuff.
forgot about
How
that. That
much
was
of
crazy.
that was true? And of course, they go beat Wake the next week, but they had the bye week in between, and then you had all the chatter about his job. I mean, it was just a terrible situation for everybody. How much of that was true, like the locker room issue, Stanford and on?
I think some part of it was true. I think a little bit of it's probably overblown. But you saw it in that game. And to your point, when you just start talking about that, like how do the players relate to a head coach that isn't really sure what he's supposed to be doing?
Right.
Because in that game, if people remember, there was an episode where Edwin Joseph, one of the defensive backs, made a mistake. He jumps off sides on a field goal attempt. So now Stanford gets the ball, a new set of downs, and then they throw a touchdown against Edwin Joseph. And so as he's coming off the field, Mike Norvell is screaming at him as he's coming off the field. And Edwin Joseph did not show any respect to Mike Norvell. He kind of like smiled. I had the binoculars watching this whole thing because I knew Edwin Joseph coming off the field is going to be interesting. How does Norvell handle this? And Norvell jumped him, and they were going at it, and Edwin Joseph just kind of blew him off and smiled. They had to be separated. Norvell kept going back at him. Coaches are pulling away from him. But I was watching Joseph on the sideline while Norvell's yelling at him, and he was kind of like laughing at him. And it was like, man, this is bad. This is as bad as it can get. Now, I will say this. I think part of it is, Edwin Joseph's not part of this team anymore. And there's some other guys on this team that are not part of this team anymore. And as far as what was reported, there was reports that like players were joking in the locker room or on the flight back. I talked to people on the staff who disputed that. They said you couldn't hear a pin drop on the airplane back. I mean, you guys have been on trips back after losses. It's not usually, it would be weird for guys to be joking
Right.
under any circumstances. So I think that was a little overblown. But I do think there were some players on the team that either didn't believe in Mike Norvell, didn't believe in the system, were not in a good place, and a lot of those guys are gone now. So now whether or not Mike Norvell can get this team back and get those guys to kind of buy in again, I don't know completely. But I do think a lot of the guys that maybe had issues with him are no longer here. Some by their own choice and some by Florida State's choice. We'll have to see, what it looks like going forward. Again, this is the one good thing about this era of college football is they have over 50 new players. So if you don't like the chemistry on your team, you can change it pretty quickly.
That's exactly where I was going to go. That I do, like about this, because guess what? If you don't respect me, you don't want to be a part of this. Please leave. Please go to anywhere else, because I don't care how good of a player you are. You're not going to help us. And that's evident by that. I'm sure that young man was highly sought after in the portal, but he made two bonehead mistakes that lost us a football game. I don't care. I don't want that on my team, and quite frankly, you don't deserve to wear that spear on the side of your helmet. And so I love that can happen. And, I think that's kind of a nice little dive in of 25. I mean, obviously not the standard. And I know, what's interesting to me, Ira, is what is next, because I have a bunch of Florida State fans, in my mentions or in my DMs and just, kind of asking me because they've heard, me talk about this. And the standard for me is just getting back to the postseason. And I know nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear 6 wins. Nobody wants to hear that that's the top of the line of where you can get, and which I'm not saying it is, but that's where you have to start, right? You have to build this thing, and it's piece by piece, it's brick by brick. So let's kind of look into this roster, and let's see, who you brought in. Obviously, Ashton Daniels, another guy that we know, fairly well with his time at Stanford, and saw what he did last year at very limited time in Auburn, was able to redshirt. I liked, initially I went on, a different podcast with my guy TJ and, talking about him with Gus, and I thought it was going to be a great fit and all these things. Well, now Gus is gone, and still think that, will be nice with Coach Norvell. So maybe before we talk about schematics, just looking at some of these players that Florida State did bring in that, you said was maybe a little bit late. I think there's some really nice pieces here. Who are a couple of guys that you think will be those instant, kind of impact players?
Yeah, I really like the offense. And again, as I mentioned before, I like the idea that Mike Norvell is going back to being the play caller. Some FSU fans are still really down on him. as a play caller and as offensive coordinator because of what happened in 2024, I still say that was, I mean, man, the pairing of
Let me
DJ.
just tell you something. When you bring in DJU, it's over. It's
We
all
told
over.
y'all.
Sorry, unless you
It,
play in the Pac-2, it ain't
well,
gonna work. So
in,
anyway, get rid of
in
2024.
defensive DJ, it was DJ, but also a bad offensive line. Like that combination. Like if he had a great offensive line, I think DJ could have been good enough to get you 7-8 wins.
Ira, if you had a great offensive line, you'd be a great quarterback too.
That's fair. Fair enough, my friend. Fair enough. But yeah, so that was just a disaster. But that wasn't about play calling. That was about you just created. You had a bad roster. That was Mike Norvell is a bad general manager, and they've made some improvements there. I think on that side of the operation, but. As far as this team, I like what they've done on offense. I mean, getting Deuce Robinson back was huge. I mean, the dude is just everything you want in a college football player. Not only is he a 6'6" wide receiver who can really run, but he's also like a great leader, hardest worker on the team. All the young players, when they come in, like they have them shadow him. I mean, he's just what you want in a college football player. Getting him back was huge. I think, you look at the running back they brought in from Texas, Trey Wisner, is not a superstar. If he was, Texas probably wouldn't have let him get away. But he ran for 1,000 yards 2 years ago in the SEC, and also caught like 500 yards in passes. I mean, he's a guy that's caught a bunch of passes and runs the ball, averages 4.5, 5 yards a carry in the SEC. So I think he's a big addition. Plus, you bring back Usman Kromah, a really talented freshman who now will be a sophomore. I like, the rest of the receiving core in general. I think it's a good group. They've got good skill. The question's going to be, and they brought in another veteran offensive line, a bunch of guys who've started at a lot of not Power 5 schools, but a lot of college football experience, multi-year starters on the offensive line. You did bring a couple guys who played at Auburn and Purdue, so they've been in Power 4 schools. But, it's another experienced offensive line. The question all is going to come down to quarterback. And you guys said Ashton Daniels, he's the $1 million question. He's never been, he started at Stanford, got some opportunities late last year at Auburn. He's never been a very accurate passer. And he's been a guy that's had turnover issues, both interceptions and fumbles in his career. That's all concerning. But he is a really good athlete. He's much bigger than Tommy Castellanos. And I think that's going to be something that's a real positive, because Tommy got banged up early last season and just seemed like he never got back to being the guy we saw against Alabama. So I think that's a positive. Then they also have Kevin Sperry, a redshirt freshman who will compete for the starting job. But it looks like Ashton Daniels is probably going to be the guy. I mean, it's hard for me to see Kevin Sperry beating out Ashton Daniels. So can this be a 7-win team? Could be an 8-win team. Could be a 6-win, whatever it's going to be. A lot of it's going to come down to Ashton Daniels, and whether or not he can play at a higher level than he has before, and maybe prove he is the guy that we saw glimpses of late last season, where he played really well against Alabama and Vanderbilt late last season for Auburn. If he can be that guy, yeah, man, it gives Florida State a real chance.
You mentioned the red shirt, and I was looking at his years. Does he have 1 or 2 years at Florida State?
I think he's only got one more year
Just
left.
one. Okay. And that's, you talk about that part of college football. I see it with Florida State and Miami. We're seeing that of just kind of these 1-year quarterbacks. And obviously, if he can get Florida State back on better footing, that's going to benefit everybody. But I'm waiting to see, it's almost like a game of chicken between Miami and Florida State. Who's going to have a long-term quarterback?
2-year starter?
Yeah, and I'm not even asking 4 years, guys. I'm talking 2 years. Can we get a 2-year starter? I do think the defense at times took strides last year. When you look at the last couple games of the season, giving up 40 to Florida, that wasn't great. But the defense wasn't great. The defense, it felt like it kept you in games for the most part. Do you feel like this defense took kind of a good step last year? What's your feeling on that?
I thought they played a little bit better as the year went on. And at that point, I think I kind of missed it in real time a little bit, because I think, I'll be honest with you, I made the trip to Stanford. And other than getting to go to Yosemite and some other things I got to do in San Francisco, that pretty much ended my season as in terms of Florida State, like what this team can be. I mean, watching them lose to Stanford, and then they didn't fire Mike Norvell. I think that was just for the fan base. I mean, I think a lot of fans checked out at that point. But if you were paying attention, if you went back and looked at it, I did think the defense played better in the last half of the season. I think Tony White's system, he started to get a better feel for what he had from a personnel standpoint. The players started understanding his defense better. I did think they played better. Now, the Florida game, to me, personally, I think that was a football team with 5 wins that knew that if they got one more win, they were going to go to a bowl game. And as excited as Mike Norvell and the coaching staff was about them maybe getting to a bowl game, I think a lot of those dudes were not real excited about practicing for a few more weeks and going to a bowl game. And they certainly didn't want to tackle that running back for Florida. So it was to me, that was almost a DNP for the defense in that game. I think they did show improvement. Now, the question is, personnel standpoint on that side of the ball is going to be the big question. You did bring back some of your top, defensive backs. You brought back Jabril Rawls, a corner. I think that was a big addition. He was a guy that they thought was going in the portal. They were able to keep him. The Desir twins come back on the defensive line. Kevin Wynn, young defensive lineman, came back. So there are some pieces, but there's still a lot of question marks on that side of the ball. But they're not necessarily, to me, about Tony White as much as they are they going to be good enough? We don't know if they're going to be good enough on defense. They got a huge transfer portal addition late. It was Chris Jones, a transfer from Southern Miss at linebacker, who's a really impressive, had 100-something tackles last year. He'll help a lot. But there's a lot of questions about the personnel, especially on that defensive front.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, like you said, there's some pieces coming in. There's some really nice pieces that you kept. Just what can you do? How can you attack this offseason with Coach Storms down in that brand new facility and that amazing thing that you have going on? And how can you take the right steps? As we close here, Ira, what does – I know we kind of mentioned win total and things like that, but just for maybe this fan base, man, like realistically – again, just to set goals and to set reasonable things here, how can the fan base get back to being all in, not only with Norvell, but just with this staff and this, administration and these players?
Rollback just dropped their licensed game day collection. Polos, hoodies, Q-zips, custom designed for your school. On game days, we wear Rollback, period.
I'll be honest with you. I think from a big picture standpoint, the fans are fans. They're going to cheer. They're going to come to the games. Though, the fans that can get to Alabama, they'll go to Alabama. They'll be here when, they play Florida and Clemson at home, and some of them will go down to Miami. Like, the fans will support their team. But in terms of like really believing in Mike Norvell, I honestly don't know if that can come back unless they win a national championship. I honestly, I just think
not even 10, like what a 10-win season?
I think they would feel good about it in the moment, but I don't think they would be confident
that he'd be the guy.
Right. Exactly. I think, going back to, again,
start paying your Seminole booster dues right now.
to pay that buyout. Well, I mean, that's the reality is in the administration, from an administration standpoint, they're doing everything they can to try to make it work with Mike Norvell because they don't want to pay that buyout. And so they've, I hinted at some of the off the field moves. I think it was really important. They went out and got John Garrett, who had been at Duke the last couple of years, previously was at Florida State as the new general manager of personnel. I think he's a really good scouting guy. A lot of experience in college and the NFL. They're building out that staff. We've got, you get Mike Norvell back as a play caller. I think that's a plus. So I think there are some things they're doing to try to kind of get this thing headed in the right direction. But in terms of the fan base really believing, they're shattered. I mean, their view of Mike Norvell is shattered. And so even looking at the success of 2023 and 2022, where they won 10 games and 13 games, a lot of people now are just saying, well, that was Jordan Travis. You had a once in a generation quarterback for Florida State, and that's where the credit goes. And you also had, unlimited, incredible talent when they jumped in the transfer portal early and got, Verse and Fisk and all those guys where a lot of schools weren't really going heavy in the portal yet. So they look at that as Mike Norvell is a product of those circumstances, and he won't be able to replicate that. So, 10 wins one season is not going to do it. I really think he's going to have to – if he had 10 wins for maybe 3 seasons – or won a national title, that could do it. But yeah, man, wow. he all the good faith he earned in those first few years is gone, and it would have to be totally rebuilt.
That is so interesting. All right, well, hey, Ira tells us the truth. He knows the deal. The good news for Florida State is they do have that kind of week 0 situation with New Mexico State, so that you can figure yourself out a little bit. You have SMU at home. That's gonna be a
Tough
tough one,
game.
and
Monday
then you
night, tough game.
go to Alabama. So, yeah, we'll learn a lot. We'll learn a lot first 3 weeks, right, Mac?
We will. Ira, this was fun, man. Really appreciate it. We could talk for another hour plus, man. But we know you got to go. We know you're busy, and we'll be reaching out again soon. Maybe post spring. We'll get a little how we feeling post spring. We appreciate your time, brother.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.